Okay, so in this video we're going to start to add color to our painterly still life, again using the example from part 1. So where we finished up was here, laying down the Imprimatura. Again, notice that it's not trying to be accurate in terms of values. This is mostly the drawing stage and the composition stage. So it's where you make all your changes, your adjustments, you get the size, proportions, everything as accurate as you can be before you get going. So when we start by putting in color very, very loosely and try to leave as much of the blue as you can, in this case blue, or whatever ground you used, visible. Because as we go, we're going to start to cover that more and more of the surface up. So if you leave a lot visible at the early stages, it sort of guarantees that you're going to have something a bit later. So notice that I'm not trying to resolve anything in terms of value, really. I'm just laying down some basic colors. There will be differences again with the photograph and the lighting, but I'll talk more about that later. So a lot of blue, a lot of ground still showing through, a lot of things hinted at. Just working on blocking things in, and then all we do with the subsequent layers is we start to get a little bit more accurate and refined. So if I go to the next one, you can see now the apple is beginning to take a little bit of shape. Now the trick is not to overdo this. It's to put things in and be painterly, but at the same time try and keep them fairly loose. Now the other thing you'll notice is I'm putting the shadows in. Let me go back. So here I've got my lines demarcating the folds, all right? And I've got a little bit of the shading started. So I've got cadmium red here, and then here I've just added some alizarin to the cad red. And then in the next step, you can see, again, I'm losing my blue. So the trick is to try and keep it in places, but it is definitely going to start to disappear. And when you have fabric that's got lots of patterns on it, for this particular approach, the best way to do it is to actually paint it without the pattern. Just try and model the 3D quality, the lights and the darks, the folds. And once you get those in, you'll see in part 3, we will then put the pattern on top of this and then modify the color and value of the pattern based on where it sits, either in the light or in the shadow. So a little bit more development in the background, more development on the objects. This goblet is still undone, but I've just thrown in some reflections that we have here. Now you can see the goblet has got some more refinement. We're starting to put some of the cloth in. The apple's getting a little bit more refined. We've got reflections from the yellow object next to the apple, reflections on this red object, more and more of the details of things that are happening in here. And so we're getting a little bit more refined, but the trick again is to keep it loose. Now another thing about this technique is I want you to be a little bold. So you're going to have unusual colors. And you can see I'm kind of starting with a purple base for a lot of these shadows. That purple will soon fade as I put more layers on top. But by starting with the purple, it's a nice vibrant color to help define the shading. So just try and find the major lines, the cast shadows, reflected light. And then you'll see this apple is a little more exaggerated than this apple. The reflection here is not so hard or sharp, but we're going to exaggerate shapes, details, values, colors, not to the point where we're distorting the shape. You know, we're not going to make this tall and skinny, but we're going to be adding brush strokes. Let's see this wiggle on here. It doesn't really exist there, but it's a nice movement that kind of picks up the distortion that's happening in here. So let me just zoom in on that a little bit. So you can see I want to encourage you to make marks that might not actually be in the original, but they fit. So if I come back over here, we see lots of bending and distorting and twisting, but it's much more uniform compared to what I've done. And the same I was talking about over here too. So don't be afraid to go for it. And you might decide later on, nah, I don't like it, it's a little bit too strong, it's out of place, but that's entirely up to you. Even here, these reflections on the stem of the goblet, just putting these blobs in place. And just be pretty bold with them. Don't worry about making them perfect at this point. You're not copying this in a linear sense. Oops, sorry about that. You're interpreting it to a degree, but still we're holding close to the realistic proportions and colors of the objects. And here you can see a little more refinement. Let me go back so we can see what happened. The yellow ball in the middle. Okay. Over here, the fabric. We go back. It's just undefined. There's just that yellow shape, really. So putting in a bit of that. Oops, going back too far. Very good. The reflection here, the cast shadows on the ground. Okay, putting in some of the darks back here. That's going to help define that. Go back. So tucking in those darks. Go back a little bit more. There we go. And the darks here and getting the stem on the apple. Okay, so keeping it loose, trying to work on one thing very quickly before, and then going to another thing. Don't stay on one object too much. I'm kind of leaving the bear till a little bit later. I'm going to work around the bear. Next part 3, we'll talk about the fabric and then the finishing touches to wrap it all up.